All right, so let's delve deeper. So, passive transport, let's talk a little bit about simple diffusion. So, what is it? Simple diffusion is the spreading out of molecules across a membrane until they are equally concentrated on both sides of the membrane. So, molecules move down a concentration gradient from high concentration to an area of low concentration. So, you're leaving that crowded subway in your, or let's say you're in the train now and the train is super crowded. You are going to, once you get to your stop, you're going to get the heck out of there because you do not want to be squished in there with all those people. So you are going to easily, without pretty much any energy expenditure, you're just going to easily be pushed out because there's no, like, it takes more work for someone else to enter than it does for someone to leave. It's like a breath of fresh air as soon as someone leaves. Like, there's a little bit more room for everybody else. So moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And so, an example of this is with oxygen and carbon dioxide. When you're thinking about your lungs, and all of your tissues, they need every tissue in your body, every cell in your body needs oxygen. And so, there is a switch at every in every cell of your body where oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide goes out. And so since there's low oxygen inside of your cells, because as soon as it's there it's used, oxygen is pushed to an area of low concentration. It goes from high, so outside here where it's higher, you breathe it in, and it goes to an area of low concentration inside every one of your cells. Now, carbon dioxide is produced from breathing and from a process that we'll get into called cellular respiration. Carbon dioxide is produced. And so, since it builds up inside of your cells, that would be an area of high concentration, it wants to be expelled. It wants to leave that crowded subway and it wants to leave your body. And that is why the majority of what we breathe out, the majority of what we expel is carbon dioxide. And so here's a little image demonstration. So there is a higher concentration of molecules over here on the left, and over time they will equalize. They want to be as spread out as possible. American culture, we do not want to be interacting with people if we do not have to. All right, so the second type of passive transport is called facilitated diffusion. And so this is when a transport protein acts as a protein channel to help facilitate the diffusion of molecules that normally couldn't pass through the cell membrane. So again, molecules move from a concentration down a concentration gradient from high concentration to an area of low concentration. They just need a little bit of extra help to enter. Okay, so here's a little diagram. This is our little transport protein, and this is an area of high concentration, and over time, they're going to equalize while they just enter through this little transport protein. And an example of some molecules that have to use this type of transport are glucose or sugar. Glucose is such a big molecule compared to other stuff that it needs to have some kind of protein to allow it through. Otherwise, it's just too big. And then sodium or salt. Sodium is also another large molecule that can't just enter on its own, so it does need a transport protein to facilitate its diffusion across. Now, both simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion are passive, so there is no energy required. It is super easy. Everyone wants to leave the subway. No one wants to stick around. Okay, and here is just a little animation showing you the two types of passive transport. So diffusion over on this side, area of high concentration, area of low concentration, and they're just freely moving across. So there's nothing in its way, nothing's helping it, they're just moving across. And then on this side we have facilitated diffusion, area of high concentration, area of low, but they just need to go through this little protein in the middle. So simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion. All right, and so the third type of passive transport, which is a specific type of simple diffusion, is called osmosis. And osmosis is the diffusion of water across the cell membrane. So water molecules move, you guessed it, down a concentration gradient from areas of high to areas of low. And so this is where this one gets a tad bit tricky. So you want to think about this in terms of where the solute is, where the molecules are in water. So if you think about that in terms of solute versus water content, there is a lot less water compared to the amount of molecules in here than there is on the left side. So look on the left, there's a ton of water. There's only 3 molecules over here. And so the water can sense, it can see that there is a ton of solute over here. And when you compare it to the other side, there is not as much water as when compared to the amount of solutes. So over time, the water is going to move over to the other side to make this more equal in terms of the concentration of the solutes. So despite the fact that the water is about the same level, the molecules on this side are a lot more crowded. So remember, in America, we do not like to talk to other people. We don't like to socialize. And the water wants to help out with that. So the water is going to move over. It's going to diffuse over into that other side in order to allow us to be able to sit as far away as possible so that we can minimize that human-to-human interaction. Okay, so when in doubt, I want you to think of this. Water follows the solutes. This is how I got through this section in college. I can't remember if I learned it in high school, but I learned it in college, and it confused the heck out of me. Can freely say that to all of you as your teacher. So I'm telling you right now, memorize the saying, and you will never forget how to discern one type of transport over the other, okay? Water follows the solutes. It follows the molecules. Okay, so there are 3 types of solutions when we're talking about osmosis, which remember is passive transport, which requires no extra energy input. So the first type of solution is called a hypertonic solution. And a hypertonic solution means that the concentration of solutes is greater outside of the cell than it is inside of it. And so water, remember, it follows the solutes and it's greater outside of the cell than inside. So water will tend to move out of the cell, down its concentration gradient, towards the solutes. And that makes the cell shrivel up. All the water left it. It's like when you wring out like a rag, it gets smaller. You wring out a sponge, it gets smaller. Okay, so that cell's going to shrivel. The second type is a hypotonic solution, and this is when the concentration of solutes is greater inside of the cell than outside of it. And so since water will tend to move into a cell towards the solutes, down its concentration gradient, it'll make the cell swell with water. So think of a sponge, dipping a sponge in water, it's just going to soak it all up and it's going to get bigger. Okay, then the third type is an isotonic solution, and this is when there are identical water concentrations to what is found in a cell's cytoplasm. So the cell stays the same. It's in homeostasis. There's the same amount of water entering and leaving the cell. There's just identical concentrations, and there's identical solute concentrations. So everyone is good. Everyone is happy. Everyone it has a minimal human-to-human interaction. Okay, so this is just going to be a little diagram. So for hypertonic solutions, it's just showing you that water is going to exit the cell, and that cell is going to shrivel up. In hypotonic solutions, water is going to follow the solute and go inside, and that is going to cause the cell to swell. Third type, isotonic solution. Water is equally entering and equally leaving, and so the cell stays the same. It is happy. It is has equal amounts leaving, equal amounts entering. Okay, and this is just a little GIF showing you each of these 3 solutions when we're talking about osmosis, which is the movement of water. So in hypotonic solutions, but I want you to think about this in terms of a comparison. So if you're talking about like a cell, think about it in terms of outside the cell and inside the cell. So one is always going to be hyper or hypotonic to the other. So if I want you to be really careful about distinguishing between what it is I'm talking about. Am I talking about the cell, or am I talking about outside of the cell? Because depending on which one I'm talking about, that is going to determine whether it is hypertonic or hypotonic, because they are both. When you have a hypertonic solution on the outside, that means by definition it is hypotonic on the inside. And it Please do not be discouraged if you were already confused, because sometimes I even get confused explaining it, and I'm your teacher. So do not fret. I promise we will go over it, and I will yell at you that water follows the solutes all day long. Okay, we will get through it together. So in a hypotonic solution, the water is going to follow the solutes. There are a lot of solutes inside of the cell, so it's going to follow those solutes, enter, and it's going to cause that cell to swell. And eventually that cell could even lyse. And when I say the word lyse, Lyse, that means it's going to basically rupture. It's going to explode into a million little pieces. So that is a hypotonic solution within. Okay, so an isotonic solution is when there's equal amounts, and so look, the cell's super happy, super smiling. Okay, and then in a hypertonic solution, the water molecules are going to follow the solutes. There's a bunch of solutes out here, and so the water is going to leave that cell and it is going to shrivel up.